right, Meghna, welcome back. Another episode of Skift Take Sessions. How are we feeling today?
All good. Ready to take on Alaska.
Yes, the behemoth Alaska. For the context for listeners, I've told Gordon this, but I'm not super knowledgeable in the aviation space. But I can say Alaska airline still is my favorite, but I don't fly them anymore because I used to live in Seattle, so I would fly them all the time. Amazing service, always on time, nice stewardess and flight crew. But now living in Denver, it's been a hard adjustment to say the least for not flying Alaska. But this session was awesome to listen to you talk with Jason Berry, who's the new or was the new Alaska COO, still is, but at the time you had him on stage, and his first 5 weeks were not the easiest 5 weeks on the job. He had a lot of issues with, tech outages, obviously the shutdown, the government shutdown, and even a gas leak at SEA-TAC airport. So do all these, moments of chaos mean anything in terms of leadership, or do you think all of this stuff would have kind of happened whether he was in the seat of the COO position or anybody else?
Yeah, I think all of this was just poor timing when he came into the chief operating officer role. The government shutdown, I think it was unexpected that the FAA would just order airlines to trim their schedules at the height of it when I think the shutdown had, I think, was well past the 1 month mark at that point. And I think also something like the gas leak out of SeaTac, just out of anyone's control, and even with the IT outages, those were happening before he came into the role. And there's still the findings from those. It's still unclear what is exactly causing them and what investments Alaska is making to improve its IT infrastructure. I will say in the airline industry, I feel like IT infrastructure and the issues with it have come up quite a bit. In 2022, we saw Southwest have this gigantic meltdown following a big snowstorm because their IT infrastructure was quite outdated. I think even Delta, last year they struggled with the CrowdStrike and their IT infrastructure. They really were in meltdown territory during that summer. So I think the airlines have definitely struggled with IT quite a bit in recent years, and Alaska's challenge is not anything new.
Yeah. From an outside perspective, it seems like they were the first industry of travel to really lead in tech, but then they just kind of stopped and then stopped innovating, stopped changing. No one developed anything new and just let the old tech run its course. And I feel like maybe that method and strategy has caught up to them. You think
That's
so?
that's the airline industry in a nutshell, pretty much when it comes to tech.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, speaking of tech, I feel like the most clip worthy moment from this session that you had with Jason was around tech. He calls the recent outages obviously unacceptable. They, brings in Accenture, says the recovery matters as much as prevention. What should listeners listen to when it comes to the IT answers? Do you feel like he really answered them, or do you think he avoided them to some degree? And I want to give maybe a reference to one of our upcoming episodes on this show with Gordon Smith, obviously another airline editor here at Skift, where David Neeleman, the CEO and founder of Breeze Airways, was talking about sustainability in travel and airlines and how he kind of offloaded, AI is going to get crazier and dirtier and more pollution and cause a lot more unhealthy climate practices than airlines. So why, kind of like look over here, not there type of response. Do you feel like Jason answered these pretty well?
I will say Neilman is pretty outspoken on sustainability. He's very anti sustainable aviation fuel and all those initiatives. But
Mhm.
going back to Jason, I think he answered the questions to the best of his ability. But I think at that point, there just wasn't a lot of information on the outages and what exactly is the root cause, besides the fact that they had engaged with a consulting firm to analyze what was going on.
Yeah.
So I mean, his answers are not the most direct, but I think he tried with whatever information they have. I will say in Alaska's latest earnings call, they also did not give a ton of clarity on those IT outages either. Their CEO, Ben Minicucci, he described them as painful and said they were still
Mm.
working with the consulting firm to really analyze what was going on and why those outages happened. So I'm sure later in the year we'll probably get more insight on what was going on and also how they're going to plan to invest to make their IT infrastructure better.
Classic consulting firms always taking their time to find the problem. I
Yep.
love it. Well, moving into kind of the last part about this session, obviously operations was a big focus for the session, but you know, Alaska using the Hawaiian airline merger to go global through Seattle, that was a big topic. And obviously there's some talk even that the merger maybe wasn't the most successful move or strategy. Do you think, like, what should people pay attention to with this when it comes to what Jason even talks about, like the 787 growth in Europe and Asia? Is that happening?
Yeah, I think what people should pay attention to is if Alaska can actually pull this off. I think for Alaska to be doing this international expansion, especially out of Seattle, is a very difficult undertaking, just given the fact that Delta also has a hub there and Delta has the scale and ability to compete with them out of Seattle, too. A great example of this is when Alaska said it would launch flights to Rome. The next day, Delta said it was also launching flights to Rome out of Seattle. Alaska said it was going to open a flagship lounge at SEA-TAC. Delta opened its premier Delta One lounge out of Seattle. So Delta has an ability to compete, and I think that will be a thorn for Alaska. And I think that's also where some of the skepticism on the merger is like coming from, and that this is a very consolidated industry. The big four airlines already are responsible for like 80% of like the industry's capacity and profits. It's very difficult to compete if you're not American, Delta, United, or Southwest. So I think that's going to be the issue like Alaska is facing there. But so far, Alaska executives have said the reception to their international expansion has been pretty positive. Their last earnings call, I think they said bookings for London were already doing very well, and they were already like selling out.
Hmm.
They're also like eyeing more destinations in Europe. I believe like Paris is one of them, for example, and then also in Asia, I think they're eyeing like India and Thailand and Vietnam. So we'll see how much like Delta wants to, spend time competing with Alaska out of Seattle. In the past, like Delta has been very competitive and possessive over SeaTac as well. So we could definitely see that play out again here. But I will also say, like, there's a lot of speculation that maybe Alaska took on bit more than it could chew with this merger. But I think also their earnings like being sort of sluggish and not that great. There are just like other factors in there too. I think government shutdown was one of them, the
Yeah.
IT outages for another. And I think also their fuel costs have just been a lot more than their competitors. There have just been some issues with these West Coast refineries that have been driving up the prices of fuel for them. So I think those have all been like major headwinds for Alaska. But this year it just remains to be seen like how well these like London and Iceland flights actually do for them, and if they can actually go toe to toe with Delta.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot to pay attention to. So I appreciate all of your coverage on Skift, and then obviously the conversations you're having with Jay and Gordon on the Airline Weekly, and now obviously the Skift Take Sessions. So appreciate your hot take here today. For the listeners, make sure to tune in, obviously, all the way through this session with, why am I struggling? With Jason Berry, COO of Alaska Air.